Hi, fifth graders. It is Monday, November 2nd, and I have not been on video or have talked to you for quite some time now. And I am happy to say that I am really starting to feel better from my COVID experience of last week, and of course a few more days this week that I'm in quarantine. So I am down in my basement because I wanted to be in a different place than I was last week when I was reading chapters of Abel's Island. So today I am going to actually I might read all of the chapters and upload them so that you can listen to them when you have time. All right, so I am on chapter 13. Abel spent most of January and February and part of March indoors. In January, there was a great blizzard. The snow descended from the bleary sky in thick, heavy curtains through a long night. Curled up in his bed, Abel listened despondently to the howling and yowling, the lashing and whistling of the wind. His log was buried deep, and though a dim light penetrated the snow, almost none got in through the tightly shuttered windows. Even by day, he had to probe his way around. Fortunately, some air filtered through the tightly packed crystals. Here's a picture of his log kind of buried in snow there, and of course he's safe inside, but he has a hard time telling day from night, of course. Hardly knowing day from night, Abel slept and kept no schedule, and the days came and left uncounted. His chief occupation when awake was finding his food in the groping dark of his storerooms and eating it, which was a sort of tiresome ritual, a solemn munching. Otherwise, he yawned. Oh, how he yawned. Turned over again and again, thrashed around ever so much, scratched over and over, pushed the shells of acorns, hickory nuts, and sunflower seeds out of his way, and thought of nothing. Meanwhile, the sun and the occasional thaws kept lowering the level of the snow so that eventually Abel had the thrill of seeing the light that had long been denied him slice through the edge of a wind-struck shutter. He woke up one day and there it was. Things were visible. "Abel!" he shouted to himself. "Do you hear me? I can see!" He flung the shutter open. How beautiful everything looked after the prolonged darkness. How unspeakably beautiful even the shells on the floor looked. How vividly actual and therefore marvelous. Here's a picture of his day when he could see outside, or he had a little bit of light that was coming into his log. Abel opened his doorway and let the light flood in. The day seemed confident of its own splendor. The icicles hanging in the open entrance glittered. One was as big as Abel himself. He ate and drank cold water from a clay pot, and then he shoved the great accumulation of shells out of his house. And then he went to stand before Amanda's statue, which was chest deep in snow currently. "Dear heart, I love you," he exclaimed. "What a lovely day! It's February, isn't it? I need to be moving." He flexed his arms, bent backward and forward, and felt foolish before his wife. He didn't know what to say. He put on his snowshoes, got his shovel and spear, and went to read his book. Captain Burren had been wounded, he remembered. Was he going to live or not? He was going to live. His wounds were healing, thank God, and spring was coming. The talk of spring filled Abel with unbearable longing. How deeply one felt when alone. It was February, as Abel had surmised, and now winter really took hold. January had been only the prelude. Abel came in from reading his book one afternoon, unable to keep his body from shaking. His teeth chattered and clacked, and nothing would make his frigid shuddering stop. His snout ran, his eyes teared up and grew dim, his heart pounded and pained. It was a time when even the most stalwart of mice would wish to be an infant again in his mother's warm embrace. He tottered about, shivering, and stuffed every open chink as well as he could with his palsied paws, until no light came in through anywhere. The only source of warmth was his own heat-hungry body. How wonderful a fire would be. But if he made one, he realized, he could burn himself out of his own home, or anyway, use up all of his oxygen. He put on his entire wardrobe, got all of his mats together, all of the paper he had torn from the novel, whatever milkweed fluff he could find in his storerooms, and half sitting, half reclining against a wall, he quilted himself all around with these paddings and buried his face in Amanda's scarf. Gradually, his shivering subsided, and his tired muscles relaxed. He tucked his head under his coverings, and his breath helped warm his body. Thus began another long month of sad sequestration inside the log. Whenever Abel was convinced that it couldn't get any colder, it got still colder. The wind tore wildly around the world, whipping up the snow in mountainous drifts, breaking frozen branches off trees, sending icicles clattering to the glassy ground. Abel listened, and it lasted so long that he just stopped hearing it, but still it went on. Abel was sick. He was weak. Merely to turn himself over took great effort, and he was wretched. One day he found himself wondering with dull resentment, why hadn't Amanda tied her scarf on better? So that he wouldn't have had to chase it out of the cave. If she were less dreamy and more attentive to reality, if she had tied her scarf on tighter, he would now, right this moment, be at home wearing his velvet jacket and satin-lined pants, ensconced in an easy chair with plump pillows, reading a good book, or perhaps merely looking out his window at the snow. There would be a fire in the fireplace, soup with an onion in it simmering on the stove. Amanda would be at her desk correcting a poem, or better still, she'd be in his lap covering him with warm kisses. The cold and the wind outside would only be set off by the coziness inside. But Abel wasn't at home. He was nowhere near it. He thought about his loved ones, his faraway friends. Amanda was his mate, yes, and she always will be. His parents, sisters, brothers, and friends, they would always be his parents, sisters, brothers, and friends. But his feeling for them all had become shadowy somehow. How could he go on having warm, alive feelings for merely remembered beings? Living was more than remembering and imagining. He wanted the real Amanda by his side. He tried to reach out to her, but his messages, it seemed, could not travel through the icy air. He became somnolent in his cold cocoon. In his moments of dim-eyed wakefulness, he had no idea how much time had passed since he was last awake, whether it was an hour, a day, or a week. He was cold, but he knew that he was as warm as he could get. The water in his clay pot had frozen solid. His mind seemed to have frozen solid. It began to seem that it had always been winter and that there wasn't anything else, just a vague awareness to make note of the fact. The universe was a dreary place, asleep, cold all the way to infinity, and the wind, it was a separate thing, not part of the winter, but a lost, unloved soul, screaming and moaning and rushing about, looking for a place to rest and reckon up its woes. Somewhere out there in the night sky, and it could only be night, were the glittering stars, and among them, his star, the one that he had always known. This star, his, millions of miles away, was yet closer than Amanda, because if he had the will and the strength to get up and uncover his window and look out, he could see his star. He knew, therefore, that it existed. But as for Amanda, and his father, mother, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and the rest of society and the animal kingdom, well, he just had to believe that they were there, and it was hard to have faith. As far as he really knew, he himself was the only lonely living thing that existed. And in his coma of coldness, He was not even sure of that. Here's a picture of his middle of the winter. You can't even see his log anymore, but you can see that he's thinking about his star in the night sky. That is the end of chapter 13. I'm going to stop my video there, and I will be right back.